Alyssa, Amy, Dawn, Karen, and Sherwin, who are here on time. And before we get started, I actually want to invite you to use the chat box and tell us what business you're in, right? Like the field or the industry, or what you do. What is your business? It could be simple or it could be complicated. Okay. Ooh, education services. Fair enough. Refugee settlement agency. Ooh, professional facilitation. Business services job training, and you're looking for tips to train your interpreters via webinars. Okay, lovely. So thank you so much for sharing that with me, because that gives me a little bit of context as we move along. I am going to be drawing on some examples. Maybe the examples are not entire that I will be using. Perhaps they're not entirely relevant to your business right at the moment. However, sometimes it helps to hear about another business in order to get your gears turning about yours. And I will be actually taking plenty of time to take a small break to ask you to brainstorm regarding your own business, how you could use what I'm teaching for your own business. Does that make sense? Okay, so I will be inviting you to use the chat box. I do recognize sometimes it's a little bit inconvenient. I remember one time I was attending a webinar and I had was writing stuff with one hand. I had a kid in the other hand, and the presenter's like, why don't you type something in? I was like, I have no hands left, right? But I do invite you as much as possible to come back and interact with me, because it helps me build ideas and just makes everything a little bit more concrete. Okay. So that being said, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Maryna. First and foremost, I am an entrepreneur, but I'm also an executive public speaking coach. And how did I end up here? Well, first of all, through being an entrepreneur, I've been in various entrepreneurial circles, and some of my new friends started asking me for tips on pitching and stuff like that. It's basically selling from the stage. On top of that, I use webinars for my own to build my own client base. And so when all of this started happening, I thought, all of us kind of business-minded people think, okay, what can I do? What can I offer right now when, our hands kind of feel tied? And, I was really impacted by some of the stories of people just not knowing where to pivot, not knowing where to go, not knowing what to do next. And I just thought, you know what, I'm going to reach out to various business enterprises and offer what I know how to do, and that's how to sell through webinars, or how to use webinars to reach an audience, or how to present. So that's kind of what I've been doing for the past few weeks. I also want to mention, I like to think that my unconventional teaching style has landed me in some publications like Forbes and Fast Company and various podcasts and other media. And so I do like to kind of share what I know. So I want to give you a really big overview about how you could use webinars for your own business. So this is what I want you to walk away with. So we'll be together for about 2 hours. This is what I want you to walk away with. By the end of this workshop, you will have a step-by-step blueprint and concrete tools and strategies to create your own engaging and value-packed webinars and to get clients. Before we do any of that, I want to take you through a little thought experiment. Let's pretend that you get an email from an accountant. Maybe it's somebody you met before, maybe not, and it says, oh, hey, you must be getting ready for tax season. Actually, I wanted to let you know that I specialize in helping small business owners minimize their taxes. Why don't you give me a call? Oh, and by the way, if you know anybody else who might need an accountant, feel free to forward my email. So in this case, what is your reaction to getting this email? A, are you thinking, oh, great, I was just about to look for a new accountant and you just popped into my messages, perfect. Is it B, you just think, nope, no way. Or is it C, you might think, yeah, maybe I'll check them out, but when I get around to it, not now, right? And then you kind of never get around to it. So yeah, I actually was going to ask you to respond. So I'm getting a few B's, a few nopes, and I'm getting one C. Does anybody else want to chime in to this? I think most of us, if we're being kind of polite, we would think, yeah, that's not a bad idea, but I don't have time right now. I'll look into it when I have time. I definitely know that would be the case with me. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with this kind of email approach, right? I use it myself, but it has its limitation. It has its limitations. So let's look at another approach. Let's say you saw something like, You get an email that says, hi, you must be getting ready for tax season. Well, I'll actually be hosting a free webinar sharing 3 overlooked ways small business owners can save money on taxes. It's on Friday at noon, and I'd love for you to join. Let me know if you're interested or if you know anybody else who's interested. What's your reaction now? Think about what would be your reaction now. I know for me, if I saw something like this, my first reaction would be, oh, this actually could be useful. Yeah, it's much more positive. Thank you, Karen. I would say, yeah, it's definitely, this could be useful. And besides, what do I have to lose? And if I was even more interested, I would definitely clear my schedule for this, right? I wouldn't be like, yeah, maybe I'll get around to it when I have time. I'd be like, okay, Friday noon, put it in my schedule. And I would be way more likely to forward this to somebody I know. So do you see that difference between offering something extremely valuable, right? So offering something like a webinar and connecting in that way. So here is why I personally use webinars. First of all, it's time to pivot for businesses. That's not any news, right? Everything's moving online, and it actually makes sense to start meeting your prospects online as well. And aside from that, you're actually getting in front of people who are already interested in the problem that you solve. So that's huge. And even if you don't think that your business needs a digital presence, even if you don't think that you could use a webinar to start reaching clients, it might just mean that you're ahead of your competition. If you don't know how to use it, that means nobody else is using it either. So you might just be the first to kind of disrupt that industry or start using it in that way. In fact, I was recently asked to review a webinar software, which is a pretty expensive one, so people must use it for good reason. And I looked at some of the other reviewers, and it was like a jewelry designer and like a barbecue salesman. And I thought, I have no idea how these people use webinars, but I mean, they're doing something, right? And they're being unique about it. Another reason is that it can be way more convenient for you or even mandatory. You know, just in case you can't make it out of the house for some reason, I couldn't imagine why, but you know, even aside from that, I find that I do love getting invited to events, but I find that, you know, it's always downtown during rush hour, or, you know, I have to find childcare on short notice, or I have to take the toll route, and it's always like, I want to come, but there's so many things that I have to work out first, and it's inconvenient for me. Whereas a webinar is just, it's a little bit more convenient to you, the presenter, and to the attendees as well. And it also gives you a much broader audience. So I am Canadian, but I have most of my audience and most of my client base is in the States because I work online, like via Zoom with them, right? So it gives you a much broader audience because you can work online. You're not limited to the people you can meet. And what else do you need to know about webinars? Well, the buying psychology is just different in the online world. It's not the same as speaking to somebody in person about what you do and kind of networking in that way. For these reasons, first of all, a static page is just not enough. You have to actually invite people to come to see you, to come to look at you, right? And a webinar is a good way to invite people in. Oops, my apologies here. Another thing is people want to do the research and build a relationship before buying from you, right? They want to kind of get an idea of who you are and how you do things before they commit to something. People are also very sensitive about being sold to too early, right? I don't know about where you live or what happens with you, but I know, have you ever got those duct cleaning calls? And it's just like, it immediately goes into like the sales pitch for duct cleaning. And at this point, I'm at this, you know, out of principle, I'm like, I'm not going to buy this service, even if I needed it, just because it's so intrusive and so presumptuous. So people are sensitive about being sold to too early without kind of building that relationship or the person understanding what the client needs. And lastly, people's attention spans, as well as their social graces, are just shorter online. So you actually have to work harder to get people to commit to show up and to keep them hooked. So think about it this way. If we were in person, like, it probably would not even occur to you to just get up and leave or start multitasking. But online, you're a little bit more likely to do that because you have all these things in front of you, and, you know, if there's a little lull, you might think, hey, you know, what's the big deal, right? So, or if you get bored, you might just leave. So you have to work a little bit harder to keep people engaged and hooked in when it comes to webinars. It's just a little FYI. Just on that note, a webinar is not just a demo of your product, right? You can't just start talking about, in most cases, you can't just start talking about how your product or service works. Sometimes you can. But in general, you have to get people to buy in first. And it's not just a sales pitch. Now, of course, you can have a sales pitch, and I do recommend, I'm going to show you how to do that, but it's not just a sales pitch because we're not there yet, okay? You need to get people to commit to you first before you can start talking about what you do and how you do it, or how you can work with them in the business. So I want you to think of a webinar as, in the sales process, it's not the closing, it's more of the part of the prospecting. But remember, these people are already interested in what you have to offer. So this is a big deal. But it's not, you might not close that sale right on that webinar. In fact, that's not really how I do things. It's also, webinars are part of building a relationship, establishing and building a relationship. And I want you to think of it as win-win. Now, sometimes people ask me, like, how is this win-win? I put in all this work into creating this really good webinar. How is this win-win? But you have to think about it this way. These people who show up, they're actually giving you their attention. And people pay a lot of money for attention. So if you can get it by offering that webinar, it really is a good exchange, a fair exchange. Okay, so I definitely want you to think of webinars as win-win. And on top of that, I also want you to keep in mind that you have that ultimate goal of gaining the audience as your client. So don't forget that you do have that ultimate goal. So before I start getting into the details, actually, I want to show you what we will cover. And my apologies, I have two screens going on, and I'm kind of going between all of them. But here's what we'll cover. We're going to talk about the webinar structure. We're going to talk about some messaging elements that make it more persuasive and more kind of irresistible to your clients. And we're going to talk about various FAQ, like how do I get people to show up, and like what tools do I use, and just various miscellaneous strategies. And between each one of these, we're actually going to take a little break where I will be asking you questions, or you can ask me questions, and we can sort of brainstorm for your business. Is that fair? Can I get like a yes or something like that? Thank you so much. Okay. And while we're getting started, I actually want to ask you, have you ever attended a webinar? Okay, not a webinar like this one, but more of one where, you learn something, but there's also a sales pitch that comes with it. Can you type in yes? Can you type in yes if you have attended a webinar like that? Okay, so I'm getting a couple of yeses, a couple of no's. Regardless of whether you're a yes or a no, if you've seen this or not, this is still, you're going to learn what to do. But if you're a no, this might be like a lot more new to you, right? But if you have attended a webinar before, this is the basic structure, right? There's an intro, content, and pitch. That's really all it comes down to. But really, that's only the tip of the iceberg. That's only the 10% of what you should focus on. This part is easy. The structure is easy. Here's the other 90%, the big part. You have to use your webinar to get your audience excited to solve their problem. This is kind of what you're actually doing during your webinar. You actually want to establish your authority. You want to, and authority doesn't just mean you want to show that you're the best of the best. You want to show what it's like to work with you, why they should work with you, okay? And lastly, you want to address pain points. Pain points are probably one of the most important parts of the sales process, and I'm going to show you how to do that, okay? So I call this the messaging elements. Get them excited, establish authority, and address pain points. And each part of your webinar, as you go through your intro, your content, and your pitch, each part of your webinar should address at least one of these elements. You should be always checking in. Am I doing something to get people excited? Am I establishing authority? Am I addressing the pain points? Okay. So as we go along, I actually want to just dive straight into how you're going to do that. So how are you going to get people excited about solving their problem? Well, first of all, you want to ask yourself and picture, what does it look like when my client's problem is solved? What does it look like when my client's problem is solved? Okay, I want you to kind of answer that question briefly in your mind right now. First of all, as you're answering this in your mind, I want you to be as specific as possible, right? Like use all the details that you can imagine, right? If there are numbers, use real numbers. If you're, let's say, I know nobody's a web developer, but like if you're a web developer, let's say you could increase your traffic to 10,000 views a day or something like that. Like use actual numbers if that's relevant to you. Or if you're, in business or professional development, like you could increase your income by this much or ask for a raise by this much or something like that. Use real numbers if that's relevant to you. Be very visual and vivid here, right? So you could use words like, imagine getting excited to go to work or something like that, right? Be very visual and vivid here. Apply contrast, like before and after of the problem and once the problem is solved, if that's relevant to you. And use words like imagine if or what if and words like that. Does that make sense? Okay, so I actually want to look at an example of, let's say, a web designer. So what problem does she solve, and how can she get you excited to solve your problem? And again, like I mentioned earlier, it's kind of good to think about another person's business in those ways, because it gets the gears turning. It helps those concepts settle in, and then you can think about your own business. Like it clears the blind spots a little bit. So what problem does she solve, and how can she get you excited to solve your problem? So if you want, you can type it in, or you can just think about it in your head. But the way that I would answer this question, just in simple terms, I would say she helps businesses build websites if they don't want to do it themselves, right? You could also be more specific. She helps people bring in more traffic. She could help with client engagement. Like, let's say she brings in more traffic or increases some sort of statistics for you, right? Some sort of measurement for you. She could also say she solves the problem of having to maintain it for yourself if you don't have the time, right? So now let's talk about how makes you look cutting edge. Yeah, she makes you look cutting edge, or she brings personality to your website. Okay, beautiful. So how can she get you excited? Oh, can we slow down, please? I'm having trouble taking notes. Okay, I can slow down. Sorry about that. I'm personally really excited, but I think that there will be a recording as well, just so you know. But I definitely will slow down. Sorry about that. So how can she get you excited, right? So for the person who said cutting edge, right? So she could say, imagine having like that professional looking website that perfectly reflects your business. See, we're being visual here. That perfectly reflects your business, and any update is just an email away, right? So she's getting you excited, right? Like for me personally, in the beginning, I found my website really, really time consuming. So like any update is just an email away. I just do it all for you, right? So you're being very specific here. And how many hours would that save you? And what would you do with that time? You see how I'm getting you excited? Like, oh my God, I'm going to save some time here if I hire a web designer, or if I work with a web designer, right? So this is an example of getting you excited about the problem that she solved. So somebody says she can tell me how she has helped others quantify and increase business after the website. Yeah, so she could say something like, "What if your website had, an extra 10,000 views a day?" Right? Like right away that like there's a light bulb in your head there, right? How would that change your business? And again, you're getting excited. How would that change your business, right? Instead of just having one sale here and there, what if you had, all this traffic and all you have to do is just put new products in front of them, right? So this is a way of getting people excited about their business. I want you to think about how you could get people excited about solving their problem, but I'm actually going to give you time kind of in between these chunks, right? So you'll have time for this. I'm going to give like a little break, but just keep that in your mind right now. Okay. We're moving on to the next part, establishing your authority. So I want you to demonstrate why they should work with you over someone else. Why they should work with you over someone else. Okay, and again, your authority is not just your expertise, right? Your clients may choose to work with you over somebody else for any reason, right? It could be your approach, your personality. It could be just like a little thing that they might be interested that you're not even necessarily selling, that you're not aware of. That's kind of the beauty of webinars, right? And especially if you're working one-on-one with them, if you'll be working one-on-one with somebody, you do want to show off how you do things in your webinar. You want to show off your kind of secret sauce as you're going along. Okay, and so here are some ways that I do this, or I get people to do this, right? You could use testimonials and social proof, right? So somebody said she could bring examples of what she's done for other people. That's a testimonial. Social proof is also saying, here's all the other people I've worked with that are kind of in your field. That's establishing your authority. Another thing is any accolades or awards. that you might have had that's relevant. Your expertise and your experience, right? Like maybe where you've gone to school or how many years of experience you've had or something along those lines. Like what have you done before that might be impressive to people? Your unique voice and your personality. That's important in certain business categories. Like if you're like a mental health presenter or something, that's important that you have that personality that people could work with. And your story, like how you got to do what you do, right? When you talk about how you got into your field, how you started your business, it kind of starts describing and demonstrating why you're so passionate about it. And again, it gets people attracted to working with you. So these are a few things that help you establish your authority. So I just want to mention that this should be relevant to your niche. Should be relevant to your niche, okay? So for example, because I work kind of in executive coaching and I also work with entrepreneurs, I like to mention that I've been published in Forbes and Fast Company, right? That kind of gives a certain social proof that I don't really need to work too hard to get otherwise, right? So that's relevant to my client base. In another group, that might not be that relevant, but I might talk about my family, right? Or my previous work experience or the conferences I've been to or something along those lines. So think about some things you could mention that would be relevant to your group of people, to your sub-market, to your niche. Okay. So let's look at an example for, let's say, a home stager. Okay. So how can she establish her authority? And how would having a niche market help her? Take a moment to kind of think about it in your head, or you can type in an answer. I have to mention the answers are going by so fast I can't catch every single one. So maybe I might have to look at them during like our quick break, but feel free to type it in. But how can she establish her authority, and how can she how would having a niche market help her? So testimonials from satisfied clients, that's extremely important. What else? So here, testimonials would be a really good way to do it. Another way would be like if you've been featured somewhere, or if you work with a niche market could reduce your competition. That's right. If you work with certain, top realtors or something like that, or with a certain exclusive client base or something like that, right? You could mention that, and that helps you establish your authority. In terms of having a niche market, I just want to give you a couple of examples of like things you could talk about if you have a niche market. So a few examples is like, let's say your niche is customers with smaller homes, right? If you just mostly work with customers with smaller homes, you could talk to like those little nitty-gritty details about just what having a small home is like, and just draw on examples of that to show the client that you understand that their situation is different from the one size fits all. Another niche market, potential niche market, could be like, let's say, single men, right? And so in that case, you could cut to the chase. Like, your home is not going to sell the way it is, and you need, my services to pretty it up, for example, right? So that's just, it cuts to the chase. It's a certain way that you could just approach the situation and become the authority among single men in that way, as a home stager. Right? Another one is, let's say she targets moms, right? And so she could address pain points like, your kids make everything messy and it's just impossible to keep everything up like in the 15 minutes before you go to work, after the kids leave. And so how stressful it is to have to keep up with a perfectly looking home, and you want to just get it sold as fast as possible, right? Not wait for weeks and weeks, just do it as fast as possible. So she could touch on that, and show that she understands what it's like to have kids and just like not be willing to keep up your home for a home sale. So does that make sense, how having a niche market and how you could establish your authority to your niche market? Thank you. I love that feedback. It makes me feel good about keeping going. Thank you so much. Okay, so the next thing I want to move on to is actually pain points. Pain points. Okay, so your client has these inner battles that they think that nobody gets, and it might keep them from doing business with somebody. okay? Your client has these inner battles and you're not sure where they are. They're not necessarily fully related to your business. They could be kind of adjacent or around your solution. So it helps to kind of bring them out, okay? So if they hear their pain points mentioned, their ears perk up and now they're listening. They get that you get them. They know that you get them, and now they want to know what you have to say on the topic. Okay, and the clearer you can articulate those pain points, the more you'll draw those clients in, right? And this is actually important to any sales process. So it's not just for webinars, it's not just for presentations. It's really important to the sales process in general. Okay, so as an example, I was just talking about the home stager. Now, the home stager, like I said, if she was talking to me as a mom, she could bring my pain points like, yeah, I totally get, having your kids that, their toys are all around and you don't want to deal with it. So let me deal with it. And if somebody brought that up to me, I'd be like, yes, I'm listening. What can you do for me, right? I would be way more likely to listen to them if they brought up my pain points. I want to touch a little bit more on those pain points. Pain points are not necessarily the problem that you're solving. Okay? It's not the same thing as the problem that you're solving. Okay, but it's those little fears that keep your clients up at night. Okay, so those little frustrations or excuses. And if you can show your clients that you get them and that you can offer relief, that's when they will listen. That's when they will listen, okay? So let's look at an example of the landscaper. What are his clients' pain points, for example? What could be his client's pain points? And the pain point is not that the client wants a nice deck to sit on or whatever, a nice garden to sit and drink tea on. There are other pain points related to hiring a landscaper. Take a moment and just think about that for a second. Somebody asked me to go back to the last slide, sure. But think about the landscaper. What pain points might they have? Or might their clients have? Can't keep up with weeding. Okay, what else? The clients might not have the time to do the work themselves. What else? Getting the home ready to sell. Okay. So I do appreciate those answers, but I would argue what you're saying is more like the problem that you're trying to solve. Okay, let me give you an example of the pain points that if you address them, you're much more likely to listen, right? So if I were to come up to you, let's say I was a landscaper and I said, hey, are you getting your home ready to sell? You might be like, yeah, no, yes, no, I don't know. But if I was addressing pain points like, I know other landscapers, you've probably heard these horror stories. They don't show up. They, are always over budget. They take the whole summer to do the work. And then, they're not done by the end of the summer anyway. And you always have to follow up with them. Those are pain points. Those are those frustrations that would keep you from hiring somebody. And again, you see that when you hear that, you're like, yeah, that is frustrating. So if that landscaper were to address those, you're much more likely to kind of hear what they have to say. Do you guys hear that difference? If I start talking about those, like, I know you must be frustrated by the stories you've heard about other landscapers who just don't show up or, are hard to get in touch with. Right. Another possible pain point is I might personally, for me, like I get a little bit embarrassed about my front and back garden, right? Everybody sees it and live in a townhouse. So I get a little bit embarrassed. Like sometimes my neighbors make like a little, oh, you better go get weeding or something like that. And so personally, I get that like, oh, is that really that noticeable? And so that's that little frustration that I'm like, oh, I hope no, it's like that inner battle. Like, does everybody know this? Like, you know what I mean? Like, is this true? So that's that little pain point that they could hit on that. Thank you, Alyssa. That's a little pain point that they could hit on that would make me feel like, oh, maybe I should listen to what you have to say. Okay. If somebody came up to me and was like, oh, would you like to have a beautiful garden that you could have, you could sit back and enjoy a cup of tea at? I'd be like, yeah, that sounds interesting, but that doesn't make me want to listen more. Does that make sense? So that's kind of the idea of pain points. Let me give you examples of a few more examples of pain points. So they could be financial. you could talk about, the fear of kind of losing money or not gaining money. Kind of the fear of losing money on something is a little bit stronger than the fear of not gaining money on something, right? So you could talk about like, I know you're scared about wasting a whole bunch of money on this. And so that's the pain point. And then you could talk about your solution or how you address that. Okay, so financial, that's a pain point. Strategic, that's a pain point. Let's say you offer software, or like, let's say you're a web developer, right? And in order to update somebody's website, there could be a week of downtime. And that's a pain point. Like I would be scared, like, oh, they're gonna have my, my information, they're gonna take everything down, but then who knows when, when everything's gonna go up again, right? So if they address that pain point, like, listen, I know that this is important to you, and I'm gonna do it within a day. It's only gonna have a day of downtime or, an hour of downtime. Then they're addressing my pain point. I'm like, okay, you get what I'm scared of, so I'm willing to listen to what you can offer now. Does that make sense? Another one, social or professional. Okay. So I mentioned to you that I am a public speaking coach, and one pain point that I come across a lot with people who are interested in working with me is that they're kind of afraid to interact with their boss, right? They're afraid to speak up with their boss. They're afraid of looking stupid in front of their boss, right? And so I can address it like, listen, I know that it's kind of scary to be in that meeting and you want to say something, but you just don't know how to speak up, right? So that's, when people hear that, a lot of people are like, yes, that is me, right? Your pain point should be like, yeah, I do think about that. That's such a good point. So that's kind of how I hit the pain point. My pain point is not, oh, wouldn't you like to be a better speaker, right? I go into those little tiny details. And just as an example, it could be fear of judgment or fear of missing out. So as business owners, sometimes you're going to be working with people who can't necessarily make the decision, right? But they're the ones who are kind of assigned to speak to you, and they have to really vet you in order to, before they can, introduce you to their boss or something like that, right? And so they probably have that fear of judgment from their boss. Like they don't want to bring something up as a solution before they're really, really, really sure, because they're scared of, not scared, but they might have that fear of judgment from their boss before, if the solution is not perfect. So if you can address that, listen, I understand that you probably don't want to bring something to your boss that's not a done deal or that's not a complete package. So what can we do? I want to work with you. Does that make sense? Is it a pain point? Beautiful. I'm hearing a little bit. So thank you so much, Karen. I'm hearing a little bit of interference from somebody's mic. Do you mind just muting yourself or just checking again that you are muted? Thank you so much. So a point about pain points is don't guess what it is. Don't guess what it is, because we have, as business owners, we have blind spots. We kind of like to think, oh, of course their pain point is that they want a nice garden. Of course their pain point is that they want this or that, or they want that. So it's usually a little bit more kind of warmed into the problem. Okay, so don't guess. Find out your client's pain points by either interviewing past and present clients or past and present prospects about what are those little frustrations about other around the problem or around other providers or around something like that, right? What are their frustrations? Interview them. Usually people don't mind about being interviewed on this topic, especially if you frame it as a frustration and not a pain point. Look at your target market or communities, right? So let's say you have some sort of, like you're in a Facebook group, or let's say for similar people in your field or something along those lines. Like look at those target market communities if you have one at hand. Is everybody kind of complaining or asking about something similar? Like that would be a pain point that you could address, right? If you're always hearing like, oh, this doesn't really work, or it doesn't, I've already tried that, like that's a pain point. So you could address it. Like, I know you've already tried this, this, and this, but this is how we're going to make it work for you. That's a pain point. Ask professionals in related fields. So for example, if you're a lawyer, you could ask an accountant, or like, what are your clients generally complaining about, right? Or what are their frustrations? If you're an accountant, you could ask a lawyer. If you're a home stager, you could ask a real estate agent, and so on. Like if you could ask people in a related field that's not quite yours, they're not your direct competitors, you will understand, you will have an idea of people's pain points. And lastly, think back to when you may have been your own target client. Many of you are probably in business because you had a certain frustration about how things were done, and you decided to go into a business in order to kind of solve that problem, right? In order to address that little tiny pain point. So think back to when you were having that frustration and kind of try to articulate it, because that's what those people are hoping to hear. That's what your client base is hoping to hear. I'll just give you a second to write that down. Okay. So I actually want to turn it over to you right now, and I'm going to ask you 6 questions. I'm going to give you think of it as like rapid fire. Just think about it as fast as you can. Maybe write it down or type it in. And I'm going to put all 6 questions on at the end as well, right? And I'm going to take maybe 2 minutes where we could share some ideas between us, okay? So 6 questions. Who is your client? Who is your target client? And what problem do you solve for them, right? This should be easy. Take 30 seconds to answer that. And vividly describe what a problem solved looks like. Remember to use details, visuals, feelings, etc. So take like 30 seconds, just jot something down for yourself. Okay. Who's your client and what does a problem solved look like? Do you have a niche, question 3, do you have a niche market, like a subcategory of your target market? And what do you know about them that A, either others don't, or B, that makes them different from others? Okay. So do you have a niche market? And what do you know about them that makes them a little bit different, or that other people don't know about them, that you could say, hey, I know this about you. I know how hard it is to be a mom, for example, right? I'll be looking at the chat a little bit afterward. Number 5, how can you appeal your authority to that market, right? What can you say or do to show that you get them, that you are the person to work with? Okay? That could be your expertise, your experience, like a different way, your personality, a different approach, or something along those lines. How can you appeal your authority to your target market? And the 6th question is, what pain points does your ideal client have? And this is, like I said, it's hard to come up with these on the spot. So maybe we could actually do it together. But another question is, where can you research their pain points? Where can you go to start finding out what are the pain points that you could solve? Okay, so I'm going to put all 6 questions up. I know it's a little bit smaller text, and I'm actually going to invite you. I'm going to give, let's say, 4 minutes. I don't have a timer going, but I'm going to give 4 minutes. I want you to think about it, jot it down, and maybe put your answers in. So Alyssa says her target audience is medical providers working with non-English speaking clients. Okay, that's the problem that you're solving. Okay, so make it, in order to, thank you for providing that, by the way, make it more visual about what it looks like when the problem is solved. Like, imagine you just, it's so easy to speak to them. You have like a communication, a system for communication. Imagine, what does it look like when the problem is solved? Okay, so everybody take a few minutes to think about this. I'm going to turn off my my own video, and I'm going to put on some thinking music. Okay, so and if it's annoying, just mute yourself. This is my thinking music. Ah, Ah, sorry about that. Okay, I'm coming back in case you in case you turn off your volume here. I hope you didn't mind my thinking music, but sometimes having the silence is just a little bit too too weird to wait. So I'm just gonna look at your responses. If I miss somebody, I do apologize, but again, this is an exercise more for you. I like the participation I'm getting so far. So I had a list to talk about working with the refugee population, bridging gaps, cultural competency, providing interpreters, etc. So if you're working kind of like with more with the staff of these refugee settlements, you could be like the way you describe a problem solver could be like imagine if your population, the people you work with, are have this look of relief on their face because they know they can trust you, they know they can turn to you. Do you hear that? Do you hear how that's like it's visual, it's specific, like it kind of, you can almost feel like a certain relief, right? So that's kind of a way that you could approach it. Cultural competency, number four, right? What do you know about them? They have cultural competency training, providing interpreters. You could also the way you could approach that is that you understand that it's frustrating. There's so many little tiny details that nobody can think about it, right? And so you could approach it as we are so experienced with this, with your unique problems, that we will help you solve your problems as they come along. And you can list those problems, right? Like the way you just did now, but basically your kind of approach could be that you understand that they have these problems and you are there to help them problem solve as they come. Okay? And by the way, I just want to mention, I don't know your business, for all of you, I don't know your business as well as you do, but I just want to provide some jump off points, okay? From Karen, she was talking about employers in manufacturing, and she does hiring, helps with hiring. And I really like the solution is matching them with a qualified applicants and getting one or more hired. I think you said something else. It takes a great deal of study to find out why each one is special. I really like how you phrase that. Oops, I want to highlight that, but I can't. I appeal to them by being among them and participating in decisions that impact them. I really like how you're phrasing that here, and really dive into like finding out why each one is special. I know some people who do some hiring, it's like so frustrating to just get a pile of resumes, even if it's been vetted, to like, they just want like a little, post-it note that says, look at this part, or this is why I like them, right? And so that, I think that really hits the nail on the head. I would really hit the nail on the head for some people, right? I take the time to really understand these applicants so that you have time for something else, or you have time for your own whatever it is you do, right? I like how you talk about being in the decision-making process. Like, I'll walk you through, we can have that discussion, right? I like how you bring that up. Alyssa, testimonials from customers and our story. I really like how you're talking about that. Yeah, you could talk about just testimonials or little stories about, individual people, right? That can offer you something that they've said, like a positive word, or your own story, like how you became involved in this, why you're so in love with this project. That makes sense. Amy, I know you work in educational services. Your clients are school and children. Maybe I'm gonna have, okay, I'll have a look afterwards. And Alyssa's pain points are running behind on client appointments due to language barrier and the legal repercussions of misunderstanding. Oh yeah, that's probably a big one. But again, you could kind of sum it up and like, you understand those frustrations when you're always running around, you always have those tiny problems to solve, right? That other people just don't get. Like, you need somebody who can walk with you. Okay? And again, the legal repercussions part, that's a really good pain point. I don't really know how you could address that, but maybe you do, right? That's a good in my opinion, that's a good pain point to kind of bring up. Okay, so coming back to Amy, thank you, Alyssa. Thank you for that response. Coming back to Amy, my clients are schools, adults, and children, and students are running to class because they are excited to learn. Oh, that's your problem solved, right? My niche market is education and entertainment. I don't quite understand what that means, but I'm sure that makes sense to you in some way. But I get how you're starting to vividly describe what a problem solved looks like. I want you to get even more in there. Like, imagine, all these kids in the school, they're like so excited they don't want to be late. They want to get into class and, sit in their desk or whatever it is they do, right? And start looking at the teacher because they're so excited to learn, right? So really, really, really dig into, being visual. I'm just going to invite you, in case you didn't get a chance to answer in your head, I'm going to invite you to maybe use your phone or take a screenshot of this picture so that you don't necessarily have to go back through the whole recording, because these are really good questions to get you started, right? In how you describe your business, even if you don't use a webinar. Oh, I just realized I'm not on video. I'm sorry. Okay, video. Okay, so I hope that this exercise was a good one. This is just kind of part one. We're going to keep moving on, but this is the part one. To me, this is the 90%. You really want to be able to use this in your messaging, if that makes sense. Okay, everything else is just, you can play around with it. You can change it up. To me, it's not as important as like really getting down to those details, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's move on. Sorry. So far, we've covered the messaging elements, right? Those are those like things that make it more persuasive, make people's ears perk up, right? You want to get them excited to solve the problem, one. 2, you want to share your authority. And 3, you want to address their pain points. So now I'm actually going to talk about the webinar structure. And the structure is fairly easy, right? And many of you have seen this before. It's the intro, the content, and the pitch. I mean, you can get creative and do something else. I encourage you to experiment with it, but really, this is what it comes down to: the intro, the content, and the pitch. So I just the intro is a fairly okay, sorry, I just want to answer Karen. She has to go. Thank you so much for your thank you so much for your feedback. Karen has to go. Goodbye. I'm gonna let I think that it will be recorded. I'm not entirely sure. You might have to check back in with the Richmond Hill Enterprise Center, because I'm not personally in charge of this. But if you want, you can take a screenshot of my website or find me on LinkedIn, and I can connect you a little bit later. Pardon the interruption, but I am going to keep going with the intro. The intro is fairly straightforward. Thanks. The intro is fairly straightforward. All you want to do in the intro is describe who you are, right? That's kind of what I did, just a brief description. I don't like to overload people. I just kind of like to mention 1 or 2 things. Describe who you are and why you're relevant. Remember to keep it specific to your niche. You don't want to give them your whole life story unless that's relevant. What they'll learn, right? Just to give people a picture of the roadmap, and most importantly, why they need this. Why they need this, okay? And so in the beginning, I talked to you why you might want to start using webinars for your business or for your work, right? So talk about why they need this. This is really the most important part of the intro. It creates the context to get people excited to learn about what's coming next. Okay, and so in these parts, again, you want to be checking, am I establishing authority, right? You can do that when you talk about who you are. Am I getting people excited to solve their problem, right? You should be infusing those little messaging elements into each part of your webinar. So who you are, what they'll learn, and why they need this. So that's basically that's it for the intro. The next part is the content. And you might be asking, okay, this is all good, but what the heck do I actually teach these people? What do I actually cover? And that's a really good question. Okay, and so here's how I want you to think about the content. The content is kind of the main chunk of should be the main chunk of your webinar. It should be 3 to 5 points. It should be something new and non-obvious. Okay, so if you talk about something that everybody already knows, people are not going to show up, or you might lose your credibility as somebody who can actually solve problems. If you're just talking about something anybody can, everybody already knows, then it's really not that interesting. People are going to start dropping off. Okay. And it should demonstrate your expertise, your approach, and like your secret sauce and how you solve problems, how you do things, okay? When I talk about public speaking, for example, I like to talk about, this is why these things haven't worked for you, okay? Because I kind of get that, why some things don't work for some people. And so I like to really dig into that and demonstrate that I get that kind of person. I'm not just gonna give you generic, don't use PowerPoint or something along those lines, okay? So that's the idea behind the content. This is kind of what you want to teach. Here are some where you can get started with your ideas. Okay. So my favorite place to start is some common myths or misconceptions about your topic. It just makes it easier to get your brain going in that direction, okay? Some common myths or misconceptions. Another thing you could do is you could survey your target market to see what they would like to learn. Right? You could actually ask, like, what would you like to learn? I want to run a webinar. What would you like to learn? Okay. Is there something that people always ask you about? Like, they're like, oh, you're a lawyer? Like, I wanted to know how do I trademark? Is there a quick way to trademark or something like that? Like, what do people always ask you about? What have people tried before that hasn't worked? So for example, if you're, let's say, in the fitness space, right? There are a lot, that might be like a pain point. Like, I know you've tried this, and you've tried this, and I know you've tried this. And this is why it didn't work, right? And so you could use that as your teaching, as part of your teaching, right? What have people tried before that hasn't worked? What are some common excuses people make? Okay, so for example, if I was teaching you, if I was trying to, well, I am teaching how to use webinars, but if I was trying to sell that to you, I would say, you might have the excuse of everybody already does this. I won't stand out, or I don't have time to do this, or people are not interested, or something like that. But those are excuses. So you could touch on those as part of what you teach. So you could use that as a starting point. All right. So I'm actually, again, I'm going to invite you to take a minute. This is that list again. I'm going to invite you to take a minute and think about your business. What can you cover that you think people would want to learn? It could be common myths or misconceptions. You could survey your target market if you have access to that. What do people always ask you about? What have you tried before? And what are some common excuses? And again, I'm just gonna say, let's take a minute. I'm gonna invite you to type it in, but I can't quite comment for you if it's good or if it's not good, because I don't know your target market and I don't know your business. So I get excited. I'm like, yeah, of course people want to know that, but I don't know, right? You have to kind of test it for yourself. So just take 1 minute and think about, brainstorm for your business. What can you teach? Like what's 1 or 2 things or 3 things that people might want to learn about related to your field? You guys want the thinking music for a minute? Let's put it on. It'll just be a minute. Okay, I'm coming back. Okay, so I got 1 response. I could teach how to use puppets with shy students to get them to speak up. I like that idea. My apologies. Sorry, I wasn't sure if I was on mute. I really like that idea. One like kind of overarching theme you could make is like, how do I get my like if you're approaching, let's say special ed teachers or something like that, like how do I get my shy students to speak up? Right? How do I get my shy students out of their comfort zone? How do I get them to express themselves? How do I get them to share what they're after? Right? And so that could give you like a few more ideas to get started. And using puppets could be one of them, especially if that's kind of your bigger overarching method of doing things. You could say number 1 this, number 2 this, something quick, and number 3 like the really good one, use puppets. This is how I do it, blah blah blah, and this is how you can work with me in order to make that happen for your business. Okay. So I hope that kind of makes sense. So you can kind of make it more overarching or kind of a little bit more small. Like it's up to you how you're going to approach it. Okay. So I'm going to move on. So hopefully this was a good exercise for you so far. I'm going to move on to the pitch. And I can tell that some of you are not necessarily in the space of selling, but I do want you to have that skill because maybe everybody kind of needs that. So I want to move on to the pitch. Okay, so I want to tell you, don't leave it to assumption. Tell your audience that you want to help them solve the problem. Don't be like, well, this is what I do, and whatever you want. Don't leave it to assumption. Tell them that you want to work with them and help them solve the problem. They can always say no, don't worry about that, but like tell them that you actually want to do business with them, right? So my style is to invite prospects to start up a call. Right? I don't just kind of sell something on the spot. Some people do that, and that's a different kind of way to do it. I don't have time to cover that now, but invite people to set up a call, show them what that looks like. Like email me on here. This is what it's going to look like. I have like a special web page where people can set up a call with me. I show them how to click it, how to choose a time, and all that stuff. Okay. But it is important. I want you to tell them that you want them to work. You want to work with them. Okay. So here's how you kind of transition into the pitch. 1, summarize what they've learned, right? Summarize what they've learned, recap the problem and the pain points if you can. And then you want to transition. You're going to get the audience excited to solve the problem with your value proposition. This is where you could talk about what you can offer. Okay, so get them, again, remind them of their problem or their pain points and get them excited to get the problem solved. Okay, so sorry, I'm just gonna go back, but two ways that work pretty well. I'm gonna show you two ways of transitioning that I think work pretty well. One is called the tip of the iceberg. And maybe you've seen this before if you've attended webinars, that's all, okay? You could say, well, what you've covered so far is a good starting point, but if you really want whatever the solution is, here's what I can offer. And now you can talk about your value proposition, right? So for example, if you're a web designer, you could say, well, what you've learned so far is a really, really good starting point, okay? And it's definitely gonna start to bring you more traffic. But if you really want, consistent traffic of 1,000 views a day of people who are actually engaged, you should probably you need to work with a professional. And here's what I can offer, okay? You see how that's a very smooth, good transition. So yeah, I call that kind of the tip of the iceberg. So what you covered so far, it's only a little bit, but here's like the big part. The big part is really you need to work with a professional, okay? Another way to do it, another way to transition, and you can use both or just one, is something called the two options, okay? So you could say, well, here's what you covered so far, but now you have two options. You could, and just list the pain points of not hiring you, or you could do this and get them, again, excited to solve their problem, right? So you say you could have a website that, gets you 1 or 2 clients every year, and you could, spend hours and hours and hours on it every day in order to try to tweak it and make it a little bit better little by little. Or you could hire a professional and get consistent traffic every single day and probably earn more than you would spend on a web designer. Okay, so that's kind of how you would transition to your pitch. And again, now you would talk about your value proposition, how you do things, like what you can offer, and invite people to set up call, which is what I do. Okay, so that's kind of the pitch. That's the pitch. Again, I want you to remember to not leave it to assumption. Tell them that you want their business. There is a smooth way to do this, but don't just be like, well, here I am. This is how I, if you know where to find me, tell them I want to work with you. And again, then you can leave it to, you can find me later if you want to, okay? Okay, so I hope that makes sense so far. Again, this is not the end, but I just want to take a quick, tiny break. So far, we've covered the structure, right? That's the intro, the content, and the pitch. We covered the messaging elements where you get them excited about solving the problem. You have to establish your authority and you address pain points. Okay? Remember, those messaging elements, you have to infuse them into every part of your webinar as much as you can anyway, if you want to start building a relationship and showcasing that you're the person to work with. So the next part, I actually want to move on from the structure and move on to just some frequently asked questions that I get. Okay, they're a little bit miscellaneous, so it's not going to be like, it's not going to have a smooth flow like the rest of the presentation. I want to talk about how to add urgency to get people to kind of act, some software and tools that I personally use or have seen, whether you should go live or pre-recorded, how do you actually get an audience, how do you make people show up, and why you should sign up with emails, and how to use testimonials. Okay, but before we do that, I wanted to ask, do you have any questions before I move on to those like frequently asked questions? Do we have any questions so far about what we've covered? I kind of want to, not move on too much and be able to address your own questions. Do you guys have any questions you would like me to address right now? I'm just going to, again, leave about a minute for you guys to type anything in if you want me to answer it before we move on. And if you don't have anything now, but you want to ask later, I'll give you a chance later as well. Oh, thank you so much, Sherwin. It says it's great so far. I really love getting that feedback. Another few seconds, just in case you're typing. I can't tell if somebody's typing or not, but I'm just going to take my drink of water while I wait. No thinking music for this one. Okay. So I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm just going to move on. And if you do have questions, save them for the end, because if they scroll by me, it's too hard for me to scroll back. So I'm going to invite you at the end to type it in. You can, but I might miss it, just so you know. So let's just move on to the miscellaneous frequently asked questions. How do you add urgency? you kind of want to add an incentive to people to not put it off, making the decision. We kind of talked about that before. You don't want them to be like, oh yeah, that's kind of good, but I'll think about it. You want to add, if they are interested, they should act. You want to incentivize them to act, right? And so here's some ways to add a little urgency or scarcity, as we call it. Okay, so you could say something along the lines, usually a consultation costs, I don't know, $99, but for those who sign up right now during this webinar, you will get it for free, right? A consultation is like a call, right? So that's one way to do it. Another one says, everybody who signs up this week for, to work with me gets a bonus something, gets a bonus hour with me, or gets a bonus from, hour with my colleague or something along those lines, right? So offer like a bonus for anybody who signs up now. And another way you could say is that I can only take on, let's say, 3 clients this week. So, it's first come, first serve. Okay. If you push it too much, it might be a little like infomercially, but really like what you want to do is just add a little bit of an incentive, like if somebody's on the fence, to help push them over the fence. Moving on. So this is how to add urgency, right? Just like little things to get people to act now. Next, what software or tools do I personally use for webinars? Okay, so this WebEx is pretty good, but not everybody has a WebEx account. I know I don't. This is the Richmond Hills. So here's kind of a list. I used to use, and I'm just going to preface this with, I've actually closed all of the accounts I have just for cost-saving measures. So I do want to help you keep it affordable unless you have a budget for it, okay? So I used to use something called Webinar Jam. And this is a really good all-inclusive software with really, really nice features. Now, it costs about $500 per year, and so I ended up closing that account, but I actually probably will restart it because I liked it so much. So it gives you like a form to get people to sign up. It like segregates emails of people who showed up or left late and so on, right? So I personally really liked Webinar Jam. There are probably similar softwares if you just look up webinar software, probably something similar, but that's, I like something that's designed specifically for webinars, but it does seem to be really expensive. Zoom or something similar, I actually ran a webinar on Zoom recently. It's a way more affordable way to get started, okay? It costs about $20 a month and you can invite people and it kind of looks very much like what we're doing right now. So that's a thing to try. I came across something called Zoho Meetings, and Zoho Meetings, I haven't actually tried it myself yet, but it's a webinar software that has a free version that's really limited, but it is free. So in case you want to get to try it, it's something to check out. I can't like vouch for it yet, but it's something that I think is good. Or if, at the end of the day, you could also just record it and post it to a YouTube, like a private YouTube video, and then embed it on your site. So for people to look at it that way, it wouldn't be live, but it's just something you could do as well. My recommendation for people who, if it's your own business, and if you're not sure if you're actually going to, like how well this is going to work, my recommendation is to kind of test it in an affordable way before you invest in something that's really good. That's kind of my style of doing things. So that's why I would kind of go with Zoom or Zoho or something like that. But I really like Webinar Jam or things like that. I have a question. Do you pay for Cisco WebEx? This is not my account. I'm pretty sure that there are no free versions, but I have no idea. This is a Richmond Hills account, and I'm speaking from my home. Okay. But yeah, I'm pretty sure there are going to be a lot of things popping up in the next few months because, doing things from home is such a big deal right now. So I would definitely keep like researching ways, webinar software or meeting software or something along those lines to see if you can use something good. Okay, I want to move on to the next FAQ. Should you go live or pre-recorded? So by the way, we are live right now. I'm sure you've noticed, but sometimes, you might want to do it pre-recorded. There's benefits to both. I personally prefer live, but here are the benefits to pre-recorded. One is it is more convenient for you. You can do it on your own time and just, send people to that page. Okay, it is more convenient. However, it also allows you to leave links. So I've mentioned that I try to get media, and so I might say, check out my free workshop on this page. I have no idea when that will be posted, and so I want that to always be accessible to people, right? It doesn't have to be just today. They can always access it. So there's one small benefit to having something pre-recorded. Also, it can be reused, right? So there's sometimes I would, like I'll meet somebody and they're like, oh, I have questions about this. I could say, hey, I have my old webinar. Why don't you check it out? And I would just send them the link to that, okay? So it can be reused. So those are some pros to going pre-recorded, right? Record it and post it on your site or something along those lines. But why do I prefer live? First of all, it's more dynamic. And I really like that, that feedback. I really appreciate that you're replying to me. I really like that feedback to be able to talk directly to the audience. It also allows you to interact and ask questions and kind of pivot your presentation in the way that you want it to go, okay? Or the way that your clients might want to go if you're interested in that. It also adds urgency to your pitch, right? You can't really say only if you sign up right now, you will get like a free consultation if it's not live, right? It doesn't make sense. So it helps you add the urgency. I don't really know how to add urgency without when it's not live. And lastly, people are much more likely to show up. If it's only live, it only happens once. If you say, this is happening on this day, that's it. People are going to clear. If they're interested, they will clear their schedule. If you say, check this out anytime you want, people are more likely to put it off, okay? That's just the way it is. And I'm really glad that this is live and also pre-recorded. So this is really good news. But this is kind of the pros and cons to both of these. And I do use both, to be honest. So you choose what you want to do. Next, FAQ. How do I actually get people to show up? And this is a really, really big question. How do I get people to show up? Now, maybe you already have an audience of people who are dying to show up, but just in case you don't, how do you get people to show up? Well, I want you to know that 99% of your job is marketing. At least while you're starting your business, 99% of your job is to put yourself out in front, finding ways to put yourself out in front of people. Okay, so for those of you who have probably seen a webinar before, like with a pitch, probably somebody paid for advertising in order to make it to you. In this case, you probably came across something, right? Or some of you maybe are already on my LinkedIn and saw I was kind of marketing myself for this, right? So you have to do the work. If you can't put in the money into marketing, you have to put in the sweat equity. And so here are some ideas of where you could get started. And again, remember, I like to keep things affordable until I can sort of invest more money into it. But here's the beauty of offering something that's really, really good that you're excited to offer. Here's the beauty. You can get excited to tell everybody about it, okay? It's not like, oh, hey, would you like to do business with me? It's like, hey, I'm offering this awesome thing that you could probably use. Would you like to come? Come, you know what I mean? You get to post it everywhere. You get to ask people to ask their friends. Like you can get excited about it and not feel like it's work to actually put it out places. Okay, and you can actually ask other people to recommend you because they're more likely to recommend something that's valuable to their friends, right? Rather than just like, oh, can you refer me just in case? Okay, so I want you to understand that, like, when you offer something really, really good, you can get excited, and that's part of your marketing. You can get excited about offering. But where can you put it? So here are just some suggestions of things that I've tried or I know people who have tried. If you have an email list, definitely put it out to your email list. Okay, I know that I have. If you don't have an email list, I do suggest starting one up. Regardless of what you do, it is a good way to, have an audience. If you're popular in social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, definitely post that up. People go in for things like that. If you have any past clients or past prospects, right, that didn't work out, let them know, hey, I'm offering this. You might be interested, or maybe you know somebody who might be interested in this. Again, this is like, what do you have to lose sort of scenario, right? Oh, sorry, past prospects. I keep in touch with people who I've had a sales call, but did not necessarily become a client of mine as a prospect, because you never know, like things change and I might offer something along these lines, right? Like a good webinar for them that might change their mind. Cold connections. Again, this is a little bit tiring. It can be tiring, but if you have nowhere to start, it's not a bad idea to reach out cold to some people, or maybe somebody you met like briefly, even once, be like, hey, I'll be offering this. Again, because you're offering something so valuable, they have nothing to lose by showing up. So you don't have to kind of build it up too much, if that makes sense. So cold connections is an okay place to start as well. Sorry. Your professional network, like if you're working with other people in your field, feel free to let them know that you'll be doing this, and ask them to refer you as well to their professional network if that's possible. Eventbrite, right? So some of you found this on Eventbrite. That's a good place to just throw it on. Eventbrite is free, right? So you can just throw it up and just see if anybody is interested. Another place I've seen people use is like Craigslist and Kijiji. I've actually tried it. It's never worked for me, but people say that it has worked for them to get their first webinar attendees. So I think that's a pretty interesting, creative place to start. I think the Craigslist thing was before Eventbrite existed though, but if you have something similar, you could always just throw it on and see if people bite. And lastly, you can ask people in a similar niche or the similar audience or niche, right? So again, like I said before, if you are a home stager, you could ask a real estate agent, or vice versa. Or if you were a lawyer, you could ask an accountant, and so on. If people have the same kind of audience that you are hoping to gain, again, asking them for a referral or for asking them to just share your webinar is a really good place to start. Okay, and again, you're not asking for something big, like you're not asking for a full-on referral, you're just asking to share the webinar, right? So you can get excited to do that. Does that make sense about how do you get some ways to get people to show up if you literally have no audience? If it doesn't make sense, you can always ask me later, okay? Towards the end. Sorry, I'm having a little bit like a little lag in my computer, so I hope that it's not bothering you. Next FAQ, next question. How do I make my my webinar more engaging? Okay. Actually, one thing I didn't put up is keep it on the shorter side. So I would say like an hour or under an hour is a good length. I know that this one is longer, but that's because it's designed that way, right? And I wanted to have questions and all that stuff. This is not like a pitch type of webinar. It's more of like a learning webinar. But how do I make it engaging? Here are just a few tips to make it engaging. You want to add your own enthusiasm, right? Like you love your topic, so you want to add your own enthusiasm to it. And it does help to slightly over-exaggerate before you get started. Sometimes we have a tendency when we're online to just kind of like die down a little bit, like sit back and die down. People need a little bit more out of you when you are speaking online. It's just the way it is. People need a little bit more out of you, okay? Next is check in with everybody if possible. If it's a smaller group like we have today, check in with people. Say, hello, Amy, hello, Khalid, hello, Sherwin, and so on, right? It kind of, again, it hopefully gets people a little bit more interested to be there. Smile and stand. So currently I am standing. Again, it makes me feel a little bit more dynamic and more energized to kind of give you, to keep presenting to you. Add interesting stories, like little asides, little interesting stories as you go. That's really important to, again, keep people engaged and interested. Don't like wander off. If you have a tendency to like, make it be long-winded, maybe just control yourself a little bit, but add interesting stories that are relevant to what you are offering. Get people to respond and type in. Again, that makes it gets you as the speaker, as the presenter, more energized, and you're showing that energy a little bit more to your audience, and you're forcing them to pay attention by typing in. And start with a hook. A hook, I teach this in my public speaking, to my public speaking clients, but a hook is like an interesting story or a question or an activity that you get people that gets their gears turning, right? I use it as part of the intro. So my activity was, I asked you to pretend you got an email from an accountant, right? So again, you started getting your gears turning about, okay, why getting an offer for a webinar is better than just offering business randomly, okay? Cool. So I hope that makes sense to you about how to make your presentation a little bit more engaging. And I just want to give one extra tip. Text and reading are just fine in webinars, okay? So this goes against typical public speaking advice, because in public speaking, you want to have less text, you want to have less on your slides because you want people to look at you. But when you're on the computer, when people are staring at a screen, they need something to like read along with, right? And so having more text on your slides and just reading it along is just fine. You don't need to worry about it being like a more of a public speaking um, type of presentation. I hope that adds a little bit to you. Okay, moving on. Next part. Always make attendees sign up with their email if possible. Okay, so remember that you are building a relationship with them, right? And you can't just, it's not a one and done kind of deal, right? I recommend using email responder, and I'll tell you my tool. But using email allows you to, first of all, send a reminder to people. It lets you send a follow-up after, right? Especially if you're going to be pitching, like, oh, hey, what did you think about this? Like, here's the link again. It lets you kind of follow up about the webinar, and it lets you stay in touch with a newsletter. But I'm just going to give a caveat. If you're going to be putting people on your newsletter email list, you have to ask for permission. That's like a legal thing. And depending on where you are, or when you'll be viewing this, it might change, but you do have to ask for permission in order to put somebody on your email list, just so you know. Okay, and just in case you're curious, the tool that I use is MailChimp because it's just something I came across. It's affordable for a smaller list. It's actually free for a smaller list and affordable for a bigger list. And so that's just like where people enter in their email and they get an auto response right away, like, oh, here's a link, or here is, and you can use it for your newsletter, and people can unsubscribe, which is really important. Okay, I know that you used Eventbrite, so that can sort of, you can't use that as an autoresponder, but it does kind of collect emails as well. But again, you can't just assume that you can use them. I wanted to point that out. Okay, so that's my point about emails. And I think the last point I wanted to make is how to use testimonials. Okay, so if you have testimonials, definitely try to use them as much as possible. In my own webinars, I insert them into every part of my, into every point that I teach. I insert an example of what I've done, of how I helped somebody solve their problem around what I just taught. Okay, so you want to use them as social proof, right? You want to show, hey, I work with people just like you. I've been able to solve their problem. This is how. You want to create a story around them, right? So you want to describe who they are, like kind of dig into how bad their problem was, or why they needed you, and how you solved it for them. So yeah, talk about describe who they are, right? Because people want to relate. People want to know that this person had the similar problems that your client has, right? If you're talking about somebody totally different, like it's not really going to relate the same way. Describe how you solve their problem, how you address their pain points, and if possible, kind of show a before and after. So I might talk about before, this person was too anxious to speak to their boss, but now, they got a promotion and they're seen as the leader, right? That's a little bit of it's a little bit to summarize, but that's kind of how I would paint that before and after in my testimonial. Does that make sense so far? So in terms of the FAQ, the frequently asked questions, to recap, we've covered how to add urgency. Remember, just give incentives to act now, right? Give a bonus, or just give people incentives, or say, I can only work with so many people, or something along those lines. Give people, help push them over the fence if they're on the fence. Get people to sign up with their email. I talked about that. You want to use that to establish a relationship. It shouldn't be just like a one-time thing. My preference is live webinars because they get people to commit, and it's just a little bit more lively. I talked about how to use testimonials as social proof. They're really important, really helpful in getting people to kind of be more interested in working with you. And I talked about why it's easier to market yourself if you can get excited about what you're offering. It's easier to say, I'm offering this amazing webinar, than to say, oh, would you consider working with me? Okay. So I'm kind of starting to wrap up what we are learning today. So here's what I promised you. I promised you that by the end of this workshop, you will have a step-by-step blueprint and concrete tools and strategies to create your own engaging and value-packed webinars and use it to get clients. So remember that step-by-step blueprint is the structure, the intro, content, and the pitch. Fairly easy to accomplish. But there's also those like hidden strategies of the messaging elements, right? The getting people excited, establishing your own authority, and addressing pain points as you go, right? You always want to be checking, am I doing one of those things? I gave you some concrete tools and strategies so that you can get started. Like you can get off this call right now and get started if you really wanted to, okay? So what's next? The next part is that I want you to commit, okay? I want you to commit to your business. I want you to commit to starting to pivot. I want you to commit to trying new things. I want you to commit, I want you to try to make a webinar because there are easy ways to do that, but using these strategies that I taught you just now in some way. I want you to commit to push yourself further in your business. And on that note, I actually also want to ask, do you have any questions? Because we are starting to wrap up a little bit. I wanted to use the last little bit to address any questions that might be related to your business, or if you're unsure about something or anything along those lines. So I'm just gonna be here, and feel free to type in, and I will try to address that in any way that I can. Maybe if you don't have a question, just type in, or a comment, just type in no, so that I have an idea of, if I'm still waiting for somebody to type in.
So I think what we could do is we could just leave the webinar on for the next few minutes to see if other people have questions. But in the meantime, yeah, I'm getting good feedback here. In the meantime, what I'll do is I'll stop the recording, and we'll wait from here, okay?
Okay, I'm just gonna put it on so I'm gonna say, as you guys are starting to log off, I wanna say a huge thank you for showing up. I'm very proud of you that you took the time to kind of invest a couple of hours in order to learn something in order to improve your business, and even sales or presenting and stuff like that. So I want to say a huge thank you to you. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. My name is Maryna Shkoretz. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. Just let me know where you found me, because otherwise I won't know. It does help. And feel free to check out my website. I'm more about public speaking, not so much about business and webinars, but if I have an email list, if you want to join, where I share tips like this. So you can stop recording as I am. I'll just wait around for a little bit if you have any questions, but otherwise I want to say thank you, and I hope to meet you again.
Awesome. Thank you.